What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Seneca Creek live stream. If you are on YouTube, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you're on Facebook, make sure to leave a like and comment hi. We love seeing you. We love seeing everybody participate. We're going to get into some worship now, and feel free to worship however you feel most comfortable. And without further ado, here's the Seneca Creek worship team.
Good morning, Seneca Creek. Amen. Our God is greater. If you're at home, you can clap your hands. We just come to worship, thanking God for all that He's done. He's greater than any problem we have in this world today. Amen. Water you turned into wine. You opened the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you. None like you. Into the darkness you shine, and out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Sing along with me. Said our God is greater. Our God is stronger. Lord, you are higher. Let's declare that. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Our God. Oh, you're the greatest there was. You're the greatest there is, and is to come. Into the darkness you shine, and out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. Say none like you. None like you. Our God is greater. Say our God is greater. Our God is strong. Lord, you are. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Yeah. Say our God. Say our God is greater. Yeah. God is stronger. Lord, you are higher. So our God is healer. Awesome in power. So our God. Yeah. We come to honor you this morning, God. And if you are for us, there's nothing that can be against us. Hallelujah. Right here. And if our God is safe, and if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against? God is stronger. Lord, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. We believe it this morning. And we'll simply say this morning, every praise is to our God. Every time we come to worship, every time we come into the house, we're going to give God every praise, amen? In the good times, in the bad times, He's worthy. Let's celebrate this morning. Every praise, yeah, every praise is to our God. Everyone of worship, in one accord. Every praise, every praise is to our God. Yes, sing hallelujah, sing hallelujah to our God, to our God. Glory, hallelujah, is to our God. Every praise
Well, it's a great day to see you all on our live stream. I can't actually see you, but I know that you're there. So welcome back to our Seneca Creek live stream. So glad that you're joining us today, whatever day it happens to be, whether it's live or recorded later. We love to have your input, by the way. We'd love to know that you're watching. If you have questions, please let us know. We do a Q&A section at the end of each of our live streams. So if you have questions related to what's going on in our world, what's going on in the live stream, the conversations we're talking about, feel free to put those in the chat section. We have staff who are monitoring those. Also, if you don't mind, give us a like on whatever platform you're watching, Facebook, YouTube. If you're on Facebook, you can start a watch party, invite some of your friends. And if you're on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed to this channel already, we would ask you, if you don't mind, do that. It really helps us, and it lets us know who's following. And then anytime we post new things, whether it's on a live stream or not, you'll get notification of that. So welcome. Thanks for joining us for the time that we have together today. And it's kind of a special sort of switch and pivot for us with our live stream. For the last 3 months, we have been constrained to 10 people in this building when we do the live stream. We're in Montgomery County here in Maryland, just went to phase 2, which means we now have the luxury of adding a few more people to our stream team. And so that's why if you were watching, you might have been noticing, hey, there's more people that are singing, playing instruments. We have a few more tech people. So we're able to kind of beef some things up. We're not at a point yet where we can meet with people publicly in this space, but Lord willing, we'll get there soon enough, and we'll keep you posted on that. But we're excited that we can add a little bit more, and it was interesting that all of this happened on the 100th day of our shutdown, 100 days from the time that Pastor Jeanette and I sent out a video that said, hey, guess what? We're not going to be able to meet on Sunday. So it's been really interesting and exciting and educational as we've gone through the last 3 months, what we're learning about each other, about church, about connecting, about technology, and we appreciate your feedback, your input, your partnership in this journey with us. So thanks again for joining us. A couple things, actually just to get us started. So I want you to kind of think back in your own experience, your own personal history. And if you're like me, you probably have a number of situations like this where you were on some kind of a getaway, a retreat. Maybe it was when you were in high school or in college. Maybe it was a marriage retreat or a men's retreat or women's, something where you get away for a couple of days. Maybe it's just a long weekend. And the whole idea is really to help get us focused and connected with God in some way. And those kind of moments, those kinds of places and times are really powerful. If you've ever been on one, you probably have come back with that sense of euphoria. Like, this was awesome. I connected with God and everything seemed to be working right. Like I was up here on the mountaintop. And then you come back from that event and bam, reality hits you in the face, right? It's like a punch in the throat. And if you came back, if you were a student, you might have come back home and your mom or your dad gave you a hard time about not cleaning your room or not doing something. If it was a marriage retreat, you came back and the kids started reminding you of what a challenge it is to be a parent. If you were a women's or men's retreat, you might have come back and found that your spouse or some other people in your family, I mean, it's like that experience of going from the mountaintop and just crashing into the valley. And it can happen so fast. You're like, oh, well, I wanted to stay in that space, and now I'm dealing with this real world, and it's such a bummer. It's such a disruption. In this series that we're in right now, we're looking at those moments in our lives, those seasons in our lives, when major disruption comes along, and oftentimes we're asking the question in those moments, where's God? Where's God when I go from the mountaintop to the valley of despair? And so today we want to take a look in this series at one particular individual who had this kind of experience. Last week, if you followed along with us, if you were able to join us last week, we took a look at a unnamed woman, a widow, a single mom, and her disruption in her life, and we learned some powerful things from her. She interacted with this guy named Elijah, a prophet in the Old Testament. Today we want to take a look at that guy, Elijah, and what happened in his life, and how the disruption that he went through can actually help us bring some answer to the question of where is God when disruption happens in my life. So a little quick backstory. So we're talking about 8th century BC. Elijah is a prophet in the nation of Israel. Israel has been divided into 2 kingdoms, a northern kingdom, which is where Elijah is, and the southern kingdom. Things are not going well in the kingdom. The kings have grown increasingly corrupt and pagan. The king who's on the throne at the time of Elijah is a guy named Ahab. He's notoriously wicked. He marries a foreign queen, and she's bringing all of her pagan gods and worship into Israel, and Ahab is party to the crime. Elijah has the unenviable task of speaking truth to power, speaking to the king of Israel, to the people of Israel, saying, this is not what God has called you to be and to do. Of course, he's not very popular. And this leads to an epic showdown, a throwdown, we might call it today. A throwdown on top of the mountain, where Elijah says to Ahab and all of the prophets of this so-called god Baal, we talked about it a little bit last week, says, you know what, let's have a contest. Let's settle this once and for all, who's really God. And so if you don't know the story, you can read about it in 1 Kings in the Old Testament, chapter 18, where Elijah challenges all the prophets of Baal. He says, hey, you know what? Whoever God is able to bring fire and consume the sacrifice on the altar, that's the real God. Let's see who's got the power. So as the story goes out, right, the prophets of Baal spend all day. They can't make anything happen. Elijah steps up after they've done their best, and he says, okay, watch this. He takes the altar with the animal and the wood, and he douses it with water 3 times. The thing is just a soaking mess. And then he prays, and fire falls from heaven and burns up the sacrifice and the wood and the stones of the altar and the ground around it and everything. And there's this sense of, okay, now we know who the real God is. So I want you to imagine for a moment, right, that you're Elijah. And you've just had this experience where all the people who were opposed to you have been, quote unquote, put in their place. Where the truth that you've been trying to speak to power has finally just broken out in this unmistakable way. Nobody can deny this, right? I want you to imagine that you're Elijah in this situation and think for a moment about how you feel in that moment. Like you have your victory towel, right? You're like, I'm the champ. We did it, right? You are in my generation, we would say, right? You're floating on cloud 9. You're firing on all cylinders. If I was younger, I would say things like, right? You're fresh. You're fetch. You're fire. Right? You're fly. I don't even know what most of those words mean, but you know, you're in this zone, and you almost feel like you have a cape on it. Everything's going your way. And then, as the story plays out, disruption comes crashing into Elijah's life. He's on the top of the mountain, he's on the top of his game, and all of a sudden, boom, it all comes to a crash. Here's where the story, we're going to pick this up in 1 Kings chapter 19, starting in verse 1. Here's what we read. Now, Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done. Jezebel was Ahab's wife, the foreign queen, right? The pagan queen. Ahab, the king, told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. We left that part out. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me. By the way, that's kind of an ancient oath. This is kind of like, you know, I swear on the grave of my mother, or whatever you used to say, right? May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. In other words, the dead people. This is basically putting a hit out on Elijah. May the gods see about that. Right? Elijah's life is in full-on disruption in this moment. He's been floating on cloud nine, floating on good feelings, and all of a sudden he realizes it's over. It's over. Like the queen who has all the power, she's going to kill me. Like this is major disruption, right? And in that moment is a story that we want to look at. I think God has something going on. I think God is trying to communicate and trying to do something in Elijah's life, and his disruption is something we want to look at for a moment, right? Because here's what we're going to learn from Elijah, that God may disrupt your life in order to direct your life. God may disrupt your life in order to direct your life. Elijah thought he knew what it was all about, and he's going to learn that God actually has something for him in this massive disruption. In the grand scheme of life, right, we sometimes question, where is God in the middle of disruption? But we can miss the question, which is God trying to direct my life in the middle of this? We tend to think, has God abandoned me? Oftentimes from Elijah and others, it's like, oh no, he's not only not abandoned, he's actually trying to steer your life in the direction that it needs to go. So we pick up the story again, 1 Kings 19, starting in verse 3. Elijah was afraid. Yeah, I would be. And ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, by the way, this is now the kingdom south of his own kingdom. So he's left town, left the country. He left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush. He sat down under it, and he prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. In other words, Elijah, who had been, wearing the towel of victory, is like, I'm done. I'm throwing in the towel. It's over. I mean, just when you read it, like, I can't blame him. I would be despondent as well if I knew someone who had the power to take my life was out to get my life. So Elijah leaves his country. He self-isolates. His faithful servant, he leaves him behind. He goes out into the wilderness. He concludes that life is not worth living. He curls up to go to sleep. He says, God, just take my life. This is the classic, like if you were to describe his symptoms to someone in the mental health field, they would tell you this is someone who's suffering from severe depression. He's self-isolating, right? Everything is going wrong. He sees no options. He has no hope left in his life. His appetite is gone. He's listless. He's fatigued. He's sleeping. This is classic. This is what's going on. He has gone from Mount Victory to the Valley of Despair. Remember, the reason he's doing this is because Jezebel put a hit on him. But she did it because of what had just happened on the top of the mountain. What had just happened is this amazing demonstration of God's power and God's truth. And Elijah was there. He saw the whole thing. It's burned in his memory. And yet, when Jezebel says, by the way, I'm going to take your life, what happens? He loses focus. This is what happens in disruption, right? Disruption causes us to lose focus and to lose faith. To lose focus and to lose faith. Because we could look and say, Elijah, did you forget what just happened? He lost focus and this is what happens to many of us when disruption comes. Think about the disruption in your life, right? Maybe you were floating on cloud nine. Maybe you got accepted to the school you wanted to go into. Maybe you just started, a business or a new career, and all of a sudden you're furloughed. Your customers are gone. You can't go to the campus. Maybe some other disruption has come along, completely unrelated to the pandemic that has swept over our world at this point, right? It might be related to your health or to your marriage, your family, your whatever it happens to be. And you're floating on a cloud and you think everything's going great and God is smiling on me, and boom. And in those moments we can lose focus and we can lose faith. And we can forget the God that actually was working in our lives up to that point. Have you lost focus? In the disruption in your life that may be going on right now, have you lost faith? Elijah certainly did, right? So we pick up the story again in 1 Kings 19, starting in verse 5. All at once, an angel touched him, this is Elijah, and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals, not like the bread from last week, because that was bad, right? And a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then he lay down again. So he's still battling this depression, right? The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, where he went into a cave and spent the night. So Horeb is the same mountain that Moses climbed when the nation of Israel left Egypt, and Moses went up to the mountain to meet with God and get God's instructions for his people. The 10 Commandments, right? Same mountain. Now Elijah's going there. He's gone from Mount Victory, and now we find him hiding out in the cave of despair. He's clearly lost focus. But what's interesting is, like, in this story, it's like the angel of the Lord comes and says, "You need to eat something because you've got a journey in front of you. You need your strength for what lies ahead." This is just a quick, point from this story, because Elijah had been strengthened, so to speak, by what happened on Mount Carmel with the miracle and God calling down fire. He'd been strengthened by that, but that was yesterday's victory, right? Yesterday's victory won't sustain you for tomorrow's calling. This is part of what Elijah has to figure out. Like what he experienced on top of Mount Carmel, that's not going to sustain you. You need strength for today and for tomorrow's journey. And so he's nurtured, literally nourished by God for what lies ahead, right? The question I would ask you is, are you living on yesterday's victory? Or are you strengthened and supplied for tomorrow's calling? It's almost like eating. Think about it. What did you have for dinner last night or Friday night? Maybe you had a chance to get out of the house and go to a restaurant with outdoor seating or something like that. And you're like, "Oh, we had a great time." Or, we cooked out on the grill and we had ribs and, potatoes and potato salad and summer vegetables. It was a great time. We had cobbler for dessert. We had a wonderful time. We were just stuffed at the end. And I'm like, okay, so now it's Sunday. How's that food holding up for you? See, that's yesterday's victory. Okay, yeah, but I need something. And so the question is, what are you putting in your soul today for tomorrow's calling? Because we can't live on yesterday's fuel. Anyway, we're going to pick up the story again, right? 1 Kings 19, starting in verse 9. The word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" So he's in the cave on Mount Horeb. He replied, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars. They've put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left. And they're trying to kill me too." And the Lord said, "Go stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart, shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. The Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face. He went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. You see, in the history of Elijah's people, this is how God showed up. He showed up in the storm. He showed up in the wind. He showed up in the fire. You think back to Moses and the burning bush. You think back to Moses on the mountain and God shrouding himself and hiding. And this is how they were accustomed to God showing up. And Elijah's like, I'm looking for God in the storm and in the wind and in the fire, and he's not there. He's thinking, well, this is how God always shows up. But God doesn't always do what we expect. What Elijah learned in his disruption, what we can learn in our disruption is, God may show up in unexpected ways. He may show up in unexpected ways. Elijah wasn't expecting a gentle whisper. Like, if you're quiet, Elijah, you might hear it. His life was disrupted, and so he's looking for God. Where are you, God? He looked for him in the expected ways. This is what we do, right? Maybe you've done that. Maybe in the disruption that might be a part of your life right now, you go to the places where you expect to find God. You go to your favorite verse, your favorite worship album, you go to your favorite preacher, you go to your favorite songs, your favorite place, and you're like, this is where God always meets with me. It's where you expect him to show up. But God might surprise you. He certainly did Elijah. He might show up where you're not expecting him, in ways that you don't expect. His voice might sound different. It might look different. If you're going through disruption, I would say, look for God to show up in unexpected ways. Yes, God is reliable, but he's not a robot. He's faithful, but he's not always predictable. This is why, for example, solitude is such a critical practice for us. Like, am I stopping long enough to listen to where God may be showing up? Are you stopping and listening for God in whatever way that he shows up? But might be through someone or some means that you never thought of. See, God doesn't always show up in the expected ways. He doesn't always speak through the same verse, through the same song, through the same place, through the same preacher. Don't tell the preachers that. Sometimes God shows up in other ways, other people, other voices, people who may not even be like you, people you may not agree with, people you may not like. God may show up and in some very unexpected ways. Let me just ask you this, because I know many of you are engaging with us in the chat sections. So think about your own life. Think about ways in which God has shown up in unexpected ways. What was that like? Where did God show up in your life in an unexpected way? We'd love for you to just chime in with that and share that with the rest of us as we're watching along, as we're encouraging one another. Hey, this is how God sometimes showed up in my life. What was that for you? Was it a person? Was it a place? Was it a time? How has God showed up in unexpected ways? He will surprise us. The story continues. 1 Kings 19, starting in verse 13. Then a voice said to Elijah, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" I love this, right? What are you doing here? Like I can almost imagine God saying, I didn't send you here. I mean, I see you here. I didn't send you here. I sent you to take a message to the king, to speak truth to power. You've left them. You've traveled out in the wilderness. What are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah replies, I've been very zealous for the Lord. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars. They've put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left. Now they're trying to kill me too. What is he saying? God, I tried. I really tried, but it's not working. Nobody is with me, and God's almost like, okay, let me go over this again with you. Let me go over the plan. The Lord said to him, go back the way you came. Go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel. And anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat from Abel Maholah, to succeed you as prophet. Oh, and by the way, God tells him in the next verse, by the way, there are 7,000 others who have not bowed the knee to Baal. You think you're the only one, Elijah? Ha! You have no idea, my friend. You just haven't seen them yet. I'm not sure what Elijah expected to hear on the mountain, but I know what he did hear. He heard God calling him and directing him. And I think part of what Elijah's story helps us understand, in times of disruption, don't go to the mountain. Don't go to the place to listen to God unless you want to hear God's calling. Because that's what happened to Elijah. He's like, where are you, God? Where are you, God? And God's like, oh, by the way, Elijah, you remember what I called you to? Like, I'm still calling you to that. Yes, in the middle of disruption. If you find yourself asking, where is God in this disruption? Realize that God may answer you. And it may very well be with a calling. Maybe a calling that He's been calling you to already. Maybe you ignored it. Maybe you walked away from it. But in times of disruption, remember, God may disrupt us in order to direct us. Maybe it's that still small voice that you've been trying to ignore, that whisper when you lie there at night and wonder. You contemplate your career, you review your bank account, you look over, you're asking questions. Elijah is a fascinating character. Shortly after this episode, his ministry, his life come to an end. You can read about it in 1 Kings. But Elijah shows up again. He shows up again in the ministry and the life of another prophet, another miracle worker, a guy named Jesus. So I want to take you to another episode in the pages of the Bible, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 17, starting in verse 1. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And just then there appeared before them Moses and, wait for it, drum roll, Elijah, talking with Jesus. Peter, always quick to talk. Peter says, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, we'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them. A voice from the cloud said, this is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. And when the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them and said, get up, don't be afraid. And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. What in the world is going on here? Moses and Elijah? Moses and Elijah, these were the twin figures in the history of Israel that represented the law with Moses and the prophets with Elijah. Their instructions from God would often be referred to by the Jewish people as the law and the prophets. What we call the Old Testament, they call the Torah, the law and the prophets. And so suddenly, with Jesus is standing the personification of the law and the prophets. And a voice comes and says, by the way, this third guy here, Jesus, he's my son. Listen to him. Like he's connected to the law and the prophets, and boom, suddenly they're gone, and who's left standing? Jesus. The message could not be more clear that the law and the prophets were simply pointing toward Jesus himself. Elijah, when we look at his ministry, when we look at his life, in many ways, he's like Moses. He wanders in the wilderness. He goes to the mountain. He encounters God there. He has all these tremendous, miraculous powers that God works through him. He meets with God on the mountain. And so in many ways, he points back to Moses and to the law and to the history of what God started with his people. But he also points very clearly forward to the one prophet who would come after him, to the one who people were told, this is my beloved son, listen to him. And so part of Elijah's disruption, I think, teaches us this, to follow the trajectory. Follow Elijah's trajectory as he stands in the middle of this arc between Moses before him and Jesus after him and says, you know what? It started here, it's going this way. Follow that trajectory. Follow that trajectory. If your life is in disruption, if you're trying to figure out where is God in the middle of all this, go back to Elijah's life. Someone who faced massive disruption, who went from the top of Mount Victory to the cave of despair in the blink of an eye, and allow his life and his story to help answer the question, where is God in the middle of this disruption? Sometimes God may disrupt our life in order to direct our life. This is what Elijah figured out. If your life is in disruption, has it caused you to lose focus and faith like it did for Elijah? If your life is in disruption, are you trying to live off of yesterday's victory? Or are you looking for God's nourishment for you today through the power of his Spirit, through the power of his Word and his Son? Are you nourishing yourself on a regular basis? If your life is going through disruption, are you watching, listening for God to show up in unexpected ways? Or are you putting God in a box and saying, this is how God has to show up when I ask the question, where are you, God? And then finally, do you really want God to show up? Because he's probably going to show up with a calling. Because your life has a purpose and a meaning. And God created you for that purpose. And he will call you to that purpose. He will direct you to that. Sometimes, yes, through disruption. Sometimes, for many of us, that's the only way God gets our attention. If your life is in disruption, if you're asking the question of where is God, I hope that Elijah's story will bring encouragement and hope and clarity to your life. Let's pray together. God, we thank you for the story of Elijah. We thank you that he stands in such a pivotal place and points toward the person of Jesus. And God, we thank you that we can take heart from his story, that we can identify with someone who sunk from Mount Victory to the cave of despair and yet still encountered you, still experienced you, still went on, God, to live out his calling. God, would you remind us of that in those moments of despair when we're wondering where you are, in the moments of the pandemic when things aren't working out, when our plans have been tossed up in the air, when our finances or our health or our family have been decimated by this pandemic or worse, God. Would you remind us that in those moments, you still long to direct our lives to the glorious purpose for which you made us. We pray this, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, Elijah's story is amazing. Read about the rest of it if you want. 1 Kings, we were in chapter 19, but you can read before and after that. Before we wrap up, though, a couple things we do want to share with you. So I'm going to ask Pastor Jeanette to come up and join me. We like to address any questions that you may have. So we're going to try and deal with those and let you know some things that are coming up. And also just a special shout out to all the dads who are watching. This is Father's Day when we're doing this live stream. And so as a father, I can appreciate the challenges of being a dad, of recognizing that we don't always get it right. and yet we have a crucial role to play in our community, in our nation, in our families. And so hats off to all you dads. Happy Father's Day. I hope you celebrate well today. And I know it also brings a lot of memories and a lot of emotions. There are a lot of people who, when we talk about fathers, it brings painful memories. And so we want to encourage you as well to find encouragement and strength in our Heavenly Father. But anyway, Jeanette, thank you for joining us. So what do we have in terms of, did anybody, was anybody able to jump in with kind of places where God showed up in unexpected ways? Or?
Yeah, so some interesting things. So Lori Jupin shared how about 35 years ago, she had been contemplating taking her own life, and then later learned that 2 of her office mates had been praying for her. And obviously took that as God telling her to hang on, that she has, that there was more. And boy, aren't we so glad, because now she's a part of who we are, our church. Some other things. So Lisa said that she's heard God speak to her through a friend who isn't a believer and sometimes is kind of new agey, but yet God still speaks through those relationships. Nadish, coming to America with my husband at the same time, and how God showed up unexpectedly there.
Yeah.
Colette says that she really experienced God's unexpected care through the relationships here at Seneca Creek as she battled breast cancer, and then recently with her furlough. Steve Lanham, so 15 years ago, God compelled him away from working for money and towards working for people and speaking into kids and learning. And he says that was before he was even really walking with God, but obviously he can now see that God was in that, drawing him. And I love how John Hopkins said that at his lowest in life, God landed him at a white church and continues to grow his heart. Praise God. So many people. Thank you all for engaging. It's great to see and to just, learn parts of your stories and really praising God for the work that He's already done in your life. I feel like we don't share enough of that. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So if you have other stories, be sure to share those with us. We'd love to actually start including some of those on what we're doing here on our live stream, so that more people get a chance to hear and to celebrate and really be encouraged by that. So those are great ways. And God does show up oftentimes before we're even aware of it. So, okay. So what do we have? Any things that we need to know about coming up, Jeanette?
We do have a few things. So, church, we want to just make you aware of some exciting changes that are happening here with families at Seneca Creek that are going to be impacting us all, but I think are going to move our church in the direction of where God has us for the future. And so the Quest High School students are going to start being integrated into the church as a whole, particularly on Sundays when we can gather together. I've actually heard from some families who are gathering with their students, and when they heard about this, they said, wow, I'm so glad that we don't have to go back, because they have really benefited from worshiping with their high school students together, the conversations that take place. And so we're going to continue that for many reasons, of which I won't go into now. I've talked a lot with our leaders and with the parents about why we're doing this, and so I'd be happy to give you more details. But let's just say this. Our students will continue, high school, to have their midweek gatherings, their retreats, their connection events. But on the weekend, on Sunday, when we are able to meet together, we want them to be with us. They're super smart. They are asking deep questions, and they can actually have a voice into what we're doing, we feel like, here on the weekends. That they can have a voice into the conversation and help us to grow and change as a church in order to better reach new generations. So we're excited about that change that's on the horizon. And then in addition, we are going to be launching, hopefully in September, if things move in the right direction and we can actually meet together in September, we're going to be launching a preteen ministry called Switch 56. And so this is something that our leaders and our staff have been talking about for a while, is just realizing that those fifth graders are learning to think abstractly, and so often they're ready to go deeper in their faith than their younger elementary peers. And then you add that to the fact that a sixth grader is pretty different developmentally from an eighth grader. And so we're excited now to launch a brand new ministry where we're going to pair the 5th and the 6th grade together, really meet them where they're at, help them to go deeper with Jesus. And then it'll allow us to just be a little bit more laser focused and deal with some of the things that 7th and 8th graders really need in order to be prepared for high school. So we really believe this is just a great way to serve families here at our church. And so if you have questions, feel free to email Pastor Mark or myself. We'll be glad to give you more information about that, but some exciting and effective changes that are taking place. And then in order to make that happen, we're making some shifts here in our staffing as well. So I want to let you know, as of July 1st, a little bit of a shift. Josh Patterson will continue to be the high school and young adult pastor, and he's doing a great job there. And then Bob Attrell is going to move into a new role as the director of our preteen and middle school ministry. Bob has, he's raised young men from, birth all the way up to young adulthood. He's great at connecting with that middle age or middle school age, and so he's going to step into that ministry. He has some really exciting and creative ideas for that age group. And then Brooke Whitson, along with Patty Howell, will continue to lead our Powerhouse Children's Ministry. And then Heather Nicholson is moving into a brand new role that we have been wanting to fill for some time, and she's going to become the Director of Creative and Strategic Communications here at Seneca Creek. And I won't say a lot about that other than to just say this is a really vital role, and Heather's going to be working now with our whole church to really help us to better communicate, to connect you into the things that are happening, to connect our community to Jesus by getting to know who Seneca Creek is, by sharing your stories. So, she's going to be looking to unearth where is God at work and share those stories with us. So it's a really critical role, and so I hope that you will welcome Heather as she's making this transition. I know that it was a bit of a tough transition in that she wasn't unhappy with middle school or her leaders, and so there were actually a lot of tears that she shed, but also tears of joy because she was excited and is excited to move into this role, but it's kind of closing one chapter and opening a new one, which is always fun.
Yeah, and I would just say to the need and the value of that kind of role, if any of you, and I know most of you have had this experience where you're like, well, I didn't know this was happening, or nobody told me, or I didn't see it, or I didn't get the email, or the 1,001 ways that communication can fall through the cracks, highlights for us how important this is in our day and age to really focus on that. That doesn't mean there will never be problems, but it does mean that we realize this needs focused attention, and we're really counting on Heather to help us take that to a new level. So.
Yeah, we're excited. And then we want to let you know about the new app. So many of you have downloaded that app. Go to your app store. If you've got the old app, it's not going to work anymore. You're missing a lot that's going on. So this new app will do a lot more. It will really help us to connect one another. When you open that new app, you may notice there's going to be a news feed. And so that, will be updated with the most latest information. So one of the things this app does is it makes it quick and easy for you to get the current things that are taking place. And you can watch live stream right from that app. So when you go on vacation this summer, no excuse, because if you've got your phone, wherever you're at, you can connect with us right there. You can sign up for every event. You can give on that app. There's nothing that you can't do with that new app. And so we're really excited about being able to launch this at a time where technology, like this is the main way we're communicating, right?
Yeah.
So we're glad to have this app at this time.
Yeah, okay. We're still doing the healthcare.
We are. We wanted to just bring this to your attention. So we've sent out, I think, about 25 healthcare hero kits, and some to folks inside of our church who have really appreciated them. So thank you, Seneca Creek. Many of you purchased the items that we were able to put into those kits. And we just want to remind you, if you know of someone who is a healthcare hero, maybe working long hours, maybe seeing COVID patients, feel free to go to our website and nominate them as a healthcare hero. We will send a kit anywhere in the United States, anywhere in the U.S. So feel free to let us know who we can encourage this week.
Yeah. And then one last just reminder for those of you who are able to continue being a part of how we keep this ministry going, our financial partners. So thank you for those of you who have stepped into the space. We have been able to continue to meet our obligations and really to reach out to our community and meet some of the growing needs. And so thank you for those of you who are part of that. If you have questions about our finances, please let us know. If you want to know how to give, it's right here. You can give online. You can use the text to give, Seneca Give at 77977, or you can always mail something to 13 Firstfield Road, Suite 100 at Gaithersburg, Maryland. So thank you for those of you who are doing that. That wraps up our time. We don't have a closing out video today, so Jeanette and I are going to do a TikTok dance. Oh, no. No, I'm sorry. That's next week. No, I'm kidding. We're not actually doing that. But we're glad that you joined us.
We'll let Pastor Mark take care of that.
And go if you're a dad, again, just congratulations. Happy Father's Day. If you're a dad to be, like say Nehemiah, congratulations to you. And if you have a dad and you haven't called them yet today, give them a buzz. They love hearing from their kids. And anyway, so y'all have a great rest of the day. We'll see you soon.